to beat on a dead horse, but you may have heard that I'm not a drummer. And that is absolutely correct. So oftentimes when it comes to drums, I try to communicate as simply as possible. So when it comes for me writing drum parts, I tend to work to communicate my ideas as simply as possible because I just don't have the vernacular and I don't have the experience to explain to me more creative ways of communicating my ideas rhythmically. So today I'd like to tell you about how to improve your arrangement as a beginner. What is up, Yoshis? My name is Beth and I run Steadfast Ascent, and today these are 3 things that I do to make my drum tracks more dynamic. Now when I say dynamic, I simply mean the intensity of the song. So for a quieter part, you don't need as much intensity. For a louder part, you want a lot more intensity. Now you can do this in 2 ways. You can do this one by getting louder. That is kind of literally what dynamic means. But the other thing you can do is you can do more things in between. So for example, if I start with a quarter hit on my hi-hat, I can increase the dynamic by doing 8th hits, by doing 16th hits, by being a robot and doing 32nd hits. So dynamics simply means the intensity in terms of loudness or in terms of complexity for your song. That being said, let's take a look. The first thing I do is that I create a leitmotif or a main foundational idea of my drums for each song. Granted, sometimes the main idea is a simple rock beat. Sometimes it's a simple punk beat. But basically what I'm doing is I'm creating a rhythm on the kick and on the snare that defines my song. And to change the dynamics, I then take that leitmotif, I take that main idea, and I move it to different parts of the kit. So for a rock beat, instead of doing the kick and the snare and the kick and the snare, I might instead decide to do toms and the snare, or I might decide to do hi-hats, cymbals, and the snare. Moving that simple idea around the kit creates a dynamic because each of the different parts of the drums has a different dynamic to it. Obviously, it's going to be way more intense if you use cymbals than if you use toms. Which brings me to my second point, which is that each part of the drum set has different dynamic capacity. So one of the simplest ways that I use to change the dynamics in my song is I just assign one of the different parts of the drums to my accent beats. So on a simple rock beat, the hi-hat is typically doing that accent. So I might start on the hi-hat closed, and if I want to change the dynamics, I might open my hi-hat. And if I want to change the dynamics further, I might move from the hi-hat to my crash or to my ride. And to have a simply different dynamic, I might move that same hand pattern to my toms. So each drum piece has a different dynamic. Obviously the closed hi-hat is probably the chillest, and the open crash is probably the most intense. But everything in between has its own dynamic, and you can move your accents around the drum set to create dynamic. Hold up! If you're enjoying this video, it helps me if you leave it a like, and if you're interested in learning more about this stuff, feel free to subscribe. Otherwise, I think we were saying something about... The third thing that I do is I add percussional details. Now you can take your normal trap set, and your normal trap set can do all sorts of interesting things dynamically. But I, not being a drummer, tend to use this hack, so to speak, in order to create more interesting drum lines. So for example, instead of using the hi-hat, I might choose to use a tambourine or a shaker. Instead of using the snare, I might choose to use a clap or a snap. Instead of toms, I might use just a different sound like a djembe or a cajon. Another way that you can create percussional detail is actually using other instruments. Yeah, that's right. So instead of using the drums to drive the rhythm, you can use something like the guitar. I mean, what do you think palm muting really is? It's a percussive dynamic that you can use in your song to create interest for your drum track. You can also use strings to great effect, and actually, Logic Studio strings have a pretty decent dynamic range of things that they can do. So knowing these 3 things, what are you going to use in your next song? Let us know in the comments below. And if you are a drummer, can you leave us some more nuanced ways to create dynamic in the comments? Since you made it this far, I'd just like to thank you so very much for watching.